Welcome to Grant's Rock Warehouse, and tonight we are doing yet another episode in our Helix series. This is part 2, back for another taste. We're going to look at that last Capitol album in Canada and go ahead from there and look to the 90s. So Tim Durling's here, Mike Ladano's here, we're ready to talk, so let's get started.
Throw those horns up. It's time for Grant's Rock Warehouse.
Welcome to Grant's Rock Warehouse, and I want to welcome Mike Ladano and Tim Durling to the show. Tonight we are doing our second episode in our Helix series. You're probably sitting there going, well, if you watch the other Helix series, we covered those 4 Capitol albums, and then, well, we talked about it, and then we decided, well, kind of like April Wine, let's just keep going and look at the catalog. So here we are today, kids. We're going to look at the catalog. So what we're going to do today, we're going to look at that era from 1990 to 2000. We have plans for the third episode, so stay tuned for that. That'll come later. But right now, we're just going to concentrate on 1990 to 2000. So we're looking at, well, let's just get to it. And again, I want to welcome Michael and I want to welcome Tim. How are you gentlemen doing?
Wonderful.
Wonderful.
Great. Looking forward to continuing this dive into the Helix catalog. It's worth it.
I mean, not many people are talking Helix, and we feel that they deserve a shake. And a lot of this later period stuff, yeah, that Capitol era gets some love, you know, but none of this later stuff. So we're going to look at it and we're going to see, does it stand up to what came before? And I just want to say later on in the next episode, we are going to look at those first 2 records. We kind of did this backwards. We didn't know this was going to be a series. So we will be looking at Breaking Loose from 1979 and White Lace and Black Leather that came out in 81. Both were independent releases that came out prior to getting signed to Capitol, but they're both solid records that we will look at on the next show. So anyway, let's get started. I'm going to throw it over to Mike Ladano to get us started. And like I said, we're going to start out with 1990. We talked about Wild in the Streets the last time, but they put out one more Capitol record back for another.
Or they did one more Capitol record. Capitol issued 60 minutes with, which
now
had
they didn't issue that
material.
They didn't put that out here though.
Oh,
No,
not in the States. These 2 gentlemen are in Canada, by the way. So
gotcha.
In the late 80s, starting in about 87, 88, Capitol in Canada went kind of nuts with this over 60 minutes with series, and the whole selling point of it is that, you know, a CD can hold more than an hour's worth of music.
Right.
And I never really thought about it much at the time. I'm glad they did, because I didn't buy CDs when this came out, but it's kind of funny that they bothered to put it on cassette, because cassettes always had one.
I honestly thought this was a CD exclusive. Mine came in a long box.
I walked into my local Sam the Record Man in early 1990 and just saw this in the racks and didn't know it was going to be out. But of course I bought it. And so Capitol did, I mean, we did the April Wine series, Grant. They did 3, no less than 3 on April Wine. They did Tom Cochrane and Red Rider. They did Streetheart. They did Strange Advance.
Strange Advance. Yeah.
They did, who else did they do? Mike, help me out here.
Yeah, they did Gordon Lightfoot. They did.
They did Gordon Lightfoot. They did Luba. They did. They do Corey Hart. No, they do Corey Hart. But yeah, artists that were on Capitol Records in Canada. I think they did the Stampeders.
Yep.
You know, Prism. They did a Prism one. That's a good one, actually. So anyway, yeah. So Capitol in Canada did this, and because Helix were a gold and platinum selling act, yeah, it made sense that they would get one. Of course, there are a few selling points to this if you were buying CDs at this point. One is that No Rest for the Wicked, Walk in the Razor's Edge, and Long Way to Heaven were never released on CD at this point. So this is the first time that a lot of these songs were available on CD. But there were also 3 new songs There was Give It to You, Jaws of the Tiger, and Everybody Pays the Price.
Sooner or later.
That was there were 3 new songs sprinkled throughout, and it's a really good. It's a really good compilation. Like, it's a really good compilation, and I listened to this a lot. So yeah, that's something that, it's an official Capitol release, but it wasn't international. It was only in Canada. They did these over 60 minutes with.
But that over 6, hold on. Didn't they do an April Wine one that was like that though? Over
they did 3 minutes? April Wine ones. They did 3 April Wine ones. They did the hits. They did all the rockers,
which is a must-have, kids.
Yeah, it is.
You've
the rockers.
Got to have that one.
Then the third one they did in '89 was called The First Decade. So there are 3 separate April Wine ones. That's how big April Wine was in Canada. They did not 1 but 3 over 60 minutes with releases. Like, these used to be everywhere. They all had the same banner up at the top, and this is a great mix of, it's not everything, but it's a good starter for someone that was getting into Helix for sure. And for a while, it was about the easiest thing you could find, especially on the CD.
Right.
And for me, I learned a lot just from the liner notes. Like, I didn't know a lot of this stuff. Like Mike Uzelac, I never heard of Mike Uzelac. This was the first time I'd heard the name. I didn't know they had a bass player before Daryl Gray.
I don't think I knew. It was hinted at in the liner notes. I thought No Rest for the Wicked was their first album. I had no clue. Before the internet, how would you
wouldn't know?
Yeah. And
the
actually,
only way to know was in Kitchener, and we'll get to this.
Well, yeah,
you're a number of reunion concerts, and they brought back members and songs. But that's if you were local here in Kitchener. I'm from Kitchener, where Helix are from, incidentally, and that's why.
Yeah,
we're talking about this band tonight, because they were in my neighborhood. They were in my neighborhood.
And there's a segue. We mentioned Back for Another Taste. There's a segue from over 60 minutes to the next album, which I don't think we got much more to say about the compilation, do we, Mike?
Just that those 3 songs are really good, and we may hear from some of them again as we go further through the catalog.
So basically, before we go on, in case someone's looking into getting into Helix, would you say that might be a good entryway drug into the band? Maybe start out with that if they can get a hold of that.
It might be the easiest thing to get a hold of. There's one I think that is a little better, but it might be hard to find now.
Okay. So there you go, kids. We're all about trying to turn you on to things.
That's right.
So that's why I bring it up. All right. Carry it away.
All right.
Keep going. You guys are doing great.
Well, so Brian Vollmer lived in, like I was saying, Vollmer lived here in my neighborhood. He moved out of town, moved to a place called London, Ontario, where he kind of got himself back together. He was kind of thinking about quitting music. Mm-hmm. And fortunately, Brent Durner, the guitar player, he departed at this point again to become a carpenter. And so, he's left rocked by the departure of one of his writing partners. Paul Hackman, the other guitar player, had been writing a ton of stuff. But Vollmer he went through some hard times. He was mugged. He talks about all this stuff in his book. But eventually, I don't know how he did it. He wrote with a guy by the name of Mark Ribler, who I believe was based out of somewhere in New York.
Yeah.
And they just totally, like Vollmer describes it as, they kind of like tore apart his songwriting and rebuilt it from the ground up. And you can hear it. And this came out on Capitol in Canada.
It was on a label called Grudge Records in the US, which meant that it was very, very hard to find. I've seen a cassette of it. But in Canada, I think it was a show of good faith. There's a guy by the name of Dean Cameron, who since passed away, who was a big supporter of Helix, and I think he's the one that made sure that this album got a good push. None of this stuff, of course, I knew about. I just saw, it's Helix. They're on Capitol. They're a big band, right? This is my favorite Helix album. I'm going to just say it. It's my favorite.
Well, I will say, Tim, this should have got a U.S. release, people.
like a real,
it should have been part of that original Capitol series here in the
Look
States
at that
too.
classy cover art too.
Yeah, really, it's great.
Yeah, and it's
But
still got the logo.
The only thing I don't like about it, well, I know the Helix logo needs to be bigger. Because it's such a great logo. We talked about that on the last episode.
That's what this is for. It's bigger, just by virtue.
But so you know what I mean. You know what I mean.
It's a great logo. This is actually the UK version. Just real quick, it's on vinyl here, and it's weird because the last song on side 1 is "Wild in the Streets," which makes no sense at all because sonically it doesn't sound anything like this album. But anyway, they stuck it on here, so it actually makes it a 6-track album. This UK version is on GWR Records, which I think Motorhead was on at one point. Now, this album actually did come out. 1990 was a turning point year for vinyl. It actually did come out on vinyl in Canada. It's very hard to find. It's like a Capitol Records.
Yes.
Anniversary series. So the cover's really tiny on it. You could look it up on Disco. I kind of
about the size of a CD cover.
It's like they took the CD cover and plopped it into the middle. But it did come out, and I remember Mike had held up a cassette single earlier. I had the first 2 singles that came from this album, which were The Storm and Running Wild in the 21st Century. I had those on cassette single. And actually the B-side of The Storm was Everybody Pays the Price. And these are the little clues that I would pick up as to whether vinyl was still being made, because it said that The Storm was from the LP, cassette, or CD, Back for Another Taste. And it said Everybody Pays the Price is from the cassette and CD, Over 60 Minutes with Helix. So that told me that,
But it's funny you mentioned 91 because you were totally right. 91 is when most of the pressing plants shut down.
Yeah.
That was when all the record companies abandoned vinyl. Yeah, you could still get it to some degree because Nirvana, Nevermind, they pressed some of that. And, of course, that's worth $1 bazillion. Foo Fighters records came out later too. Stone Temple Pilots came out on vinyl. But I mean, for the majority of things.
Yeah, unless you were in the UK.
91 was
in the UK or Australia, there's really odd albums that you can find on vinyl, like Blue Murder's second album and the self-titled Motley Crue album and things like that. But yeah, as far as North America was concerned, 1991. But I mean, this should have done better than it did. I'm not really sure why. I will say that there's a ballad on here, "Good to the Last Drop," which was the highest charting song
that
Helix had in Canada. It went all the way to number 17. So it got a lot of airplay. But Mike's going to tell you why that cassette single he's holding up is a grail, because there's something on there that even certain members of the band don't even know about.
Yeah, that's 100% true.
Yeah.
First of all, it has the Tony Bon Jovi remix of "Good to the Last Drop," although you can get that on compilations, and there was a CD single for the Tony Bon Jovi radio remix.
Yeah.
So
it's not really my favorite. All they did was just added a bunch of keyboards to it.
Contrary to Tim, it's my favorite.
Don't listen to Mike. The album version's better. It's a great song regardless.
Note the different logo as well. But it's this track, SEX rated. Now you might say, but Tim, that's on the B, or Mike or Tim, either one of you guys. What are you talking about? That's on the B-sides album. And you'd be right, except that version was re-recorded by Brent, Fritz, Daryl, and Brian, I believe. That's the one. What's one of the 3 tracks on that album where they did a reunion.
So it's a different version.
Is Paul Hackman. This is Paul Hackman. This isn't Brent. This is a completely different recording, and it starts with a really weird intro of a radio DJ talking. This is for the girl that loves me for her mind, but I want to love her because of what she doesn't mind. And it's really corny and cheesy, but the song is raging. It's raging, and it's raw, and it's way better, actually, than the version on the B-sides. You can hear a little bit of this intro. I uploaded it to my YouTube channel. If you look for the Helix special, Waltzing with Helix, 1991, You will hear a little bit. I included that on the intro. Incidentally, they replaced Brent Durner at this time with an American player by the name of Denny Balicki. And he was kind of a temporary guitar player, but he was the guy who turned them back into a 5-piece when they hit the road once again, opening for Ian Gillan and opening for Sacred Reich in the UK or in Europe.
Yeah.
And
you can the Much Music did an hour-long special. It was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Again, always supportive of these bands, right? Much Music always supported these bands. And because of that, I thought Helix were this huge arena-selling band because...
Me too. I thought they were as big as Kiss.
Yeah, like that's how they were presented, right? So that's...
There was also a VHS... there was also a VHS release that came at the same time, but I have got the
DVD
later
version.
DVD issue.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, bottom line, Tim... I was going to say, Tim, bottom line, though, you said that's your favorite Helix album.
It's absolutely
for
my
me,
favorite.
it's a top 3 kind of situation, but
it's great.
You're not... Wheels of Thunder.
Oh.
Rock and Roller Coaster.
Yeah, Midnight Express, Heavy Metal Cowboys.
Express.
Yeah.
And Running Wild in the 21st Century with Snake the Tattoo Man in the music video.
That's still that's still a concert staple for them. 21st Century.
It certainly is.
Another great ballad breakdown, which is surprising that they put that on the B side of 21st Century, because it could have been a single its own track.
Yeah, it's like a 6-minute track.
But they could have edited it. But sadly, and we're going to get to something else. This whole saga of Back for the Taste ends on a sad note.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. But before we get to that, 1991, we're just going to talk about real briefly because Grant already said we're going to talk about it later. But 1991, this release came out called The Early Years.
Yes.
And this was very, very valuable at the time because this is just a 1-disc compilation of the 2 independent albums, Breaking Loose, White Lace, and Black Leather, in 1 CD. A little bit of liner notes, but not much. But as a matter of fact, this was when I joined Columbia House in the early 90s. This was one of the reasons that I signed up, because the catalog had this and I couldn't find it anywhere.
Yeah, mine's
so this was really, really valuable because you just couldn't find those albums. So this was a good way to catch up on those albums until they were eventually reissued separately. But anyway, in summer of 1992, Helix were on tour, and their tour bus went off an embankment or something, Mike. Yeah, and sadly, Paul Hackman, guitarist and one of the main songwriters, along with Brian, died. So
I know a guy who was on tour with Helix at that time. I remember where I was that day. I was at the Cottage, and I remember Helix were on the news, and I was just like, that's not good. There's no good reason why Helix are on the news tonight. And that was why. I still have the newspaper.
It's like when in 2003, I turned the TV on and CNN's talking about Great White, and I'm like, there's no way this is good news. This has to be something horrific. And it was.
I'm getting chills on my arm just thinking about this.
Well, I remember in 94, we were eating on Ohio State campus, we were getting Chinese food, and they had the TV on up above, and MTV came on with Kurt Loder talking about Kurt Cobain committing suicide. I'll never forget it. It's like one of those moments, you know?
Yeah.
And we're sitting there
Clark
going,
from Def Leppard was a big one for me.
Same thing.
Yeah,
same thing.
That was the first time that a member of a band that I was way into died.
Yeah.
Like, not a band I discovered years later that died in the 70s. Like, this was the first time that. This was the first time that had happened. Of course.
Yeah, I think I remember Bon Scott, because I think they popped on like the radio and talked about it. I don't remember hearing it like, on the news or anything. But still, those moments in time, you take those in and you always remember them,
Yeah.
It is what it is. It's tragic.
So Brian, at this point, kind of like the April Wine Forever for Now story, Brian set about recording a solo album, but at the last minute, it was someone, the powers that be, said, hey, why don't you make this a Helix album? And in 1993, summer 93, this comes out with a Hugh Syme album cover, actually. It's a business doing pleasure with a weird, really weird Helix logo, but yet it still has some ties, because if you see on the H and the X, it's still got the little, whatever you want to call that.
Fangs.
Yeah, the fangs.
But check out that logo.
That was really,
that's weird.
But this kills me. If you have such a great logo like you had on the earlier records, why would you put this on here? Because people identify with that. Why would you put a crappy logo on here?
They were trying to market this to people who didn't know who Helix were. You know, this was the
this was.
I don't know. I don't even like the album cover. I think some of Hugh's work's good. Some of it, I'm like, look at it and I go,
You know what? I'm thinking like Hugh Syme wouldn't be cheap. I'm thinking this was something that was lying around, but I don't know.
It could be. It could be.
It's this was a different lineup. So Brent Dorner had come back, as Mike had said, and they got a second guitar player named Greg Frazier, who was a member of the band Brighton Rock. Now that didn't last. This didn't last long, but this is a much more. This is not a heavy album at all. It's not. Most of it I would call hard rock.
I like to throw around the word Nashville because there's a lot of twang.
It's kind of knowing later on that this was meant to be a solo album made a lot more sense to me, because I remember thinking, wow, this is, I mean, it's definitely Brian singing, but this just doesn't have a lot of heavy rock on it. There is one cool thing. The first track on here and the first single is That Day Is Gonna Come.
Mm-hmm.
And that featured, like, Brian Vollmer was kind of ahead of his time as far as documenting the band. And documenting meant Super 8, meant real clunky video cameras.
Yeah, they were shooting it on, Super 8.
A lot of
shooting film like Super 8.
A lot of 5 minutes a reel or something like that.
That's about right.
But he filmed like all over Canada and into the States, wherever they toured. And this video for That Day Is Gonna Come is a chronicle of that. You see some really early footage of the band. Now I remember when this is right around when I started in radio. Tug of War was another song that got was pushed to radio. It was on a sampler, which is kind of a power ballad. There's a duet with
an acoustic version that they did on Much Music, him and Phrase.
Yeah.
Which incidentally is basically the only thing you're ever going to find of Helix with Phrase on guitar, because Phrase, none of those guys play on this album.
Yeah, that's right.
As you alluded to.
Look Me Straight in the Heart is a duet with Lee Aaron.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, this album, this is weird. It's produced by Mark Ribler, who Brian was writing with, and Tom Tremors, who produced the first 3 Capitol albums. But it doesn't sound like Back for Another Taste, and it doesn't sound like the old Helix albums. Very, very kind of an odd, it's not bad, it's just different.
Don't forget our buddy Kim Mitchell played lead guitar on Sleeping in the Doghouse.
Sleeping in the Doghouse again, yeah. You can easily pick up.
Oh,
and then there was a big lull after that.
Yeah, and that's where Helix comes in.
Yeah, Helix was not active. Now, I don't know for sure what it is that Mike's holding up there, so I'm going to let him talk.
Well, yeah, as you said, Helix was sort of on ice. Daryl was still there in a business capacity. The band weren't really playing, but they were down. Now, Brent had left. He was really only in there temporarily, so they were down Brent. Fritz, I think, had departed at some point or another, and Brian Durner was playing drums. I believe Brian Durner was playing drums at the gig where Paul Hackman was killed, if I'm not mistaken. But they did some reunion concerts, and I guess the year would have been around, I don't know what year it was, but they were celebrating a reunion, and they did a concert in Kitchener with Keith Burt Zurbrigg on bass, wearing his tuxedo, and Brian Durner on drums. And to me, this is the first time I ever heard those names. I didn't know that there was a Helix before, which we will talk about in greater detail next time. So there was some activity, but there wasn't a heck of a lot. And it was hard to find anything out about the band. I found this. This is actually from a little bit later, towards the end of their lull. This is 1996. And this is a local CD compilation from London, Ontario, where Brian was living at that time. And there was another singer that he worked with a number of times named Gord Pryor from a band called Blue Bones. Tim, ring a bell?
I've seen the name Gord Pryor in the Helix credits different times.
He's written a lot, yeah. I recognize a lot of these guys from Helix. Sean Sanders is on one track here. I believe he was in Helix at one point because they had kind of like a touring lineup with a bunch of guys that never recorded.
This went into a really confusing time where there wasn't a set lineup, right. And it remained that way until about 2009. But we'll get to that in part 3.
2004 to be exact. But
well, kind of, but not really.
I know what you're talking about.
It never seemed like, I don't know. It never seemed like I don't know what you know what I'm trying to say, and I
know exactly what you're referring to. Okay. I know exactly the event because it's an event. But regardless, Helix, Set Me Free, which is a sweet cover. This is all covers, I believe.
Yeah.
The only place you're going to find it, you're not even going to find anything about this online unless you go to mikeladano.com or the Wikipedia that I wrote. Now, it says clearly, Helix, Set Me Free. I know it's blurry, but it clearly says Helix, right? You open it up and you find out that Helix is actually Brian Vollmer with a band called SFH, which stands for Sam fucking Hain. So it's Helix in name. It counts to me as part of the Helix discography because it's billed as Helix on the back. I mean, it's kind of like Queensryche, Jeff Tate's Queensryche. It says Queensryche at the top. To me, it counts. Guess who fans may have their own opinions about this. But, you know, it's not the only incident. On the back here, there's a band called the Gandharvas, another big band from London, and they're doing a cover of Iron Maiden's Wrathchild. But on the inside, it's only the lead singer, Paul Jago, with a bunch of guys from Sam fucking Hain. But they did I'm trying to think of the names of some of these guitar players because I used to know them off by heart. At one point they had Jerry Finn from the Killer Dwarves. They had a bunch of guys from the Buffalo Brothers, but they kind of got a stability back when they got Glenn Archie Gamble on drums, and he was kind of like the first stable member that they had in ages, and he was just a Helix fan. He was a Helix fanatic, and he kind of comes into play when we get to the next album.
Yeah. So reading Brian's book, this was a tough time. I mean, this was a tough time for bands of their era in general. Really tough time. And for a band like Helix that never really cracked, you can imagine it was even tougher.
It's the grunge era. These guys aren't grunge.
Yeah. But, but Brian, I respect the guy because he has just hustled and has never stopped self-promoting, and he's worked very, very hard to keep the Helix name as alive as you can keep it, right?
That's the case, maybe.
So I actually read about this. I was surprised in Metal Edge because Helix were never a band that got maybe in 84, 85, but when I was buying Metal Edge, I never read about Helix. I saw a review of this. And it's a striking, it's a striking album cover, but it's half alive. So that's Brian with short hair. His best Harvey Dent impression.
And if you look at the tongue, there's like a little orange helix on his tongue.
Now this came out on D-Rock Records, which was a label that sprang up around 96, and they did a lot of tribute albums, and I mean a lot of tribute albums with a lot of the same people, whether it was Alice Cooper or AC/DC or Led Zeppelin. well, what I mean, like doing, or yet doing covers of different things to varying quality. There were a few releases by actual bands. Rat Collage, an excellent collection of songs, came out on Duroc Records. Y&T's Endangered Species came out on Duroc Records, and this Helix, Half Alive, came out on Duroc Records, which apparently went under, and none of the artists made any money off of them. So this is called Half Alive, of course, because it's got 5 new studio tracks and a bunch of live songs between 92 and 97. It's kind of not really made clear whence these tracks emerged. But as Mike said, there are a few different people on here. So we still got Daryl Gray and Fritz on, bass and drums. He's got Gary Borden, Mark
Chicane.
Okay, I was going to say it's not
yeah.
Chicken.
You know what's crazy, Tim?
Yeah, on lead guitar.
Mark Chicane is back in Helix now. He replaced Gary Borden, who was in Helix again. Like those two guys were back in Helix recently.
Yeah. So obviously they've stayed on good terms. Now, I think that, the 5 tracks are pretty decent.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they are.
I like the cover of Steppenwolf the Pusher. I think it's really
great.
cool.
It's phenomenal.
Yeah.
It's phenomenal.
I've heard worse.
To me,
and the live stuff is kind of fun. It's basically a greatest hits, right? It was the idea was to reintroduce them, right? Because
they sound good. They sound
All
right. The thing when I listen to it, I don't want to interrupt, but I really like this record. This sounds like a band. When you listen to the studio track, it seems like a band that's had a rebirth.
Yeah.
If you like the Helix from back in the day, you'll like this because it starts right off with Shock City Psycho Rock, and this song just kills. The whole record kills.
Yeah. What I like about
Am I
this,
right?
They did
start to finish.
They didn't go grunge. They didn't pull a Dawkins and put a crappy Shadow Life out. They didn't do what Warrant did. They didn't do it sounds like Helix, They just kept. I bash Dawkins Shadow Life every opportunity I get.
And that's fine.
But you could look at but think about. I know we're just all over each other, but we get all worked up. You could look at this record though. You could go. You could look at this record. Some people may go, "Oh well, there's some studio tracks on here, and then there's live songs." Look beyond all that. Look beyond all that. If you can pick this record up, I'm sorry, but I really dig this record. And if you can find this, or at least stream it or listen to it, it has a lot to deliver. I'm just going to say. They are on fire. They're on fire.
Yeah, I listened to this a lot when it came out. I was really glad that they were back.
Right.
Yeah.
And the logo's back, kids.
And the logo's back. Oh, you're going to like this next one if you like the logo. Now, you were asking me about, is over 60 minutes with the best thing? And it kind of is. But if you can find it, and this has a release date of 1999 on it, I would recommend this. Deep Cuts. This came out in 1999 on Razor and Tie, which is a reissue label. Licensed the songs from Capitol. I mean, this is a Helix best of, but it even has songs from the first 2 albums. It's got Everybody Pays the Price. It's got Good to the Last Drop. And it's got, so the thing about over 60 minutes with it doesn't have anything from Wild in the Streets. This does, this is a pretty complete look at their career. It's got cool liner notes.
Good artwork.
Who did the liner notes? The liner notes were done by Kevin Flaherty. I've seen his name in other reissue albums too. So this is a pretty good summation of their career to this point. If you can find it. I don't know how easy this is to find these days, but this is a really good single disc introduction to Helix.
If it came out on Razor Tie, it came out in the States too. So.
That's exact, and that's significant too, because that would have been the first new thing from Helix to come out on a quasi-major label in a long time. Since Wild in the Streets, really.
Yeah, you're right.
So, and it was a good time for that to come up because there was a little bit of resurgence in the late 90s. of this. It was starting to come back around. Also in 1999, I think that's the date on this. This is one of the things I picked up one of the times I saw them live at the merch booth. B-sides, which is just what it sounds like. The packaging's a little cheap, but don't let that throw you. There are some good songs here. A lot of good songs here.
A lot of good songs.
Including the one that Mike was talking about, that SEX rated different version. Jaws the Tiger, not the same version that's on Over 60 Minutes with. I absolutely love Danger Zone. That is a slow, heavy rocker. They've done it in concert. They've kind of brought some of these songs into their set list. There's liner notes here. Like, Brian's really meticulous with this stuff, but there are liner notes here that talk about where these songs come from. And actually, a couple of these, maybe Mike can tell me right off which ones they are. There's a couple of these that are really old, right?
Yes. Dating back to the early years. I think they might even predate, if I'm not mistaken, they might predate the album Breaking Loose. But Thinking It Over, I think that's a Del Shannon cover.
Del Shannon, yes, because anyone who's read Brian's book knows that they backed Del Shannon. They were Del Shannon's backing band for like, what, a week at this bar?
Yeah.
When he was doing like the bar circuit. I mean,
can you imagine that?
That's kind of funny, right? But then if you listen to the early Helix albums, it's not exactly heavy.
It's not metal.
So it's barroom rock.
It's
right?
more like Foghat. When I listen to those first two records, it really reminds me of Foghat.
Almost Southern, yeah.
Almost Southern. There is a Southern tinge.
Take a look at Brian's shirt in this picture. It's half alive, but with a black background, which I kind of think is
looks better. It looks better.
Yeah. Now, this might be a good time to point out that a lot of Mike's CDs have colorful trays in them, and that's by design. Mike, how did you get access to all those funky trays?
By buying them at the store in which I worked at the era in which these CDs came out, which was the late 90s, early 2000s. We used to stock every color of the rainbow.
Yeah, so they don't do that anymore. They don't.
Yeah.
Well,
and it just
no
turns out that buying red, like it worked with virtually every Helix album. The only one that I have here that's not red was the Over 60 Minutes with, which was Burgundy. And don't ask me where I stole that from, but
it could have been anything, right? Like, it could have been some pop album that happened to have a burgundy tray on it. Like, if you had one that came in that was,
I would swap
bright.
tray.
Well, yeah, if you had a CD come in from anybody that was like bright neon green, you could put that on any of the Poison albums.
Right. Madonna Bedtime Stories is a very, very common CD to get a light blue tray with, which looks perfect on Kiss, Hot in the Shade. Trust me.
Oh, yeah. That is it, Mike. That is such a brilliant idea. Like, it's such a brilliant idea.
Stole it from my buddy T-Rev. I don't have any original ideas. Every idea I have is stolen from one of my friends.
But you took it and ran with it.
But look, look at this. I stole this. Can you identify the Kiss CD that I stole this case from?
You wanted the best.
You got it.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's like orange and
could this geek get any geekier? I don't know. Maybe. Hold tight, kids. It's okay.
Not when you got Mike and I here, I'm afraid.
I mean, we can't get any geekier than this.
So I remember, like, this was in the late 90s now, to bring this back. I didn't have ready access to the internet all the time, but I remember hearing about, hey, Helix are playing in Fredericton, and me and like a friend drove down, and nobody knew anything about it. Like, it was hard. It was hard to get information on these bands until the internet kind of became more of a thing. And by the way, Helix's website, planethelix.com, was a treasure trove. And a lot of the stories that were on there ended up in Brian's book, which we'll talk about in the next episode, because that's the purview of the episode. There is one more thing that I have to talk about, and it's old, but it came out in 2001. I want to touch on this.
And I have a funny story about this one.
Well, yes, I know what it is, too. This is called Live in Buffalo. Now, this was recorded in 1983 on the No Rest for the Wicked tour. And I got this through the Helix website. This is very raw, no overdubs. This was, it says, it was recorded at a noon-hour show after driving overnight from Detroit. Great live show the band had just prior to the release of Walking the Razor's Edge. So I'll let Mike take it from here. There's one particular thing here that made this worth getting. What was it?
100%. Yeah. I mean, it already has rare tracks on here, like Everybody Pays the Price. That, to my knowledge, had not been.
That just shows you how far back that song dated, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But the interesting thing about this is there's one song on here that I didn't know existed until the CD came out. And some of the band members also didn't know existed. In 2006, I ran into Brent Durner at a bar and became friends with him. And later on, he released his first solo album, Brent Durner's Decibel. And because this is something that I've been doing all these years, I asked to interview him. And he's like, yeah, come on over. So I came over to his house and we talked, and he's really into writing lyrics. Lyrics are sort of like the spark of his creativity. And sometimes he just needs a song title, and the song title will trigger a verse, which will trigger a chorus. And he had a bunch of lyric sheets with bits of lyrics and song titles. And he says to me, Mike, I really want to write a song called Hot on the Heels of Love.
Mm-hmm.
Not wheels. Not wheels.
Not wheels.
No, Hot on the Heels. Hot on the Heels of Love.
Yeah. It seems awfully similar.
Yeah.
So I said to him, but Brent, you did write it. It's over there on your CD shelf. And he's like, what? It's like, take it out. So he pulls out Live in Buffalo, and sure enough, Hot on the Heels of Love. He wrote a song called Hot on the Heels of Love. He sang it, lead vocal by Brent Durner, and it's not on any Helix album. And anything with Brent singing lead is somewhat scarce in the first place, because I think he only sang lead on the first two studio albums. And
yeah, he sang on songs like Crazy Women, I think.
Oxygen.
Billy Oxygen.
You know,
Billy
we
Oxygen.
could go, we can't get into this because I'll go all day.
Yeah. But yeah, no, you know, what's wild about that story is that it's not like, you know, it's not like he said, I want to write a song with this title, and Helix had done a song by that, but not when he was in the band. So not only did he write the song when he was in the band, he sang it.
Yeah.
It's like you'd think that he would remember.
But to his credit,
they were probably drinking a lot.
Yeah.
Probably doing a lot of
drugs. Yeah. You know, I mean, but it's just funny that. So what did he say when you said you were?
He's like, oh shit.
Yeah.
I think I made a comment to him. You should listen to it. It's really good.
So, you know, it wouldn't be the first time if he'd written another song with that. Helix have two different songs called It's Too Late, two completely different songs with the same title.
I'm just going to say,
but
you boys have been doing shows for years. I could probably throw out a title. You can't remember everything you've done.
By the way, but real quick.
You know what I mean?
Mike's thinking the same thing. I forgot to mention this. One of the other things that's really cool that they put on this Deep Cuts is the song It's Too Late, which was on the Iron Eagle soundtrack, and it wasn't on any of the Helix albums. So that was, for me, that's why I sent away for this. And the Iron Eagle soundtrack, of course, was on Capitol, which makes sense. But it's
one other
decent
thing
song.
On here, Tim. Let's not forget, also the video remix of The Kids Are All Shaken,
which is different.
That was the first time.
It's a different vocal, and it's got keyboards added to it. Yes, yeah. Because when I heard this, I'd kind of forgotten about that, and I put that, and I go, "Oh yeah, that's right. It is different." Sorry, Brent. You got two.
I love it. No, this is what it's about. This is what it's about, kids.
See, I was on the internet. I'd been on the internet since around 1998. So I was on whatever it was, helixrockband.ca or on.ca, whatever it was back then. I was there. I was waiting with bated breath with everything that Brian released. And when these things came out, I would diligently work at getting these things inputted into our computer system at the record store, so that if a used copy was ever going to come in, but if a used copy did come in, it would say Helix Deep Cuts, the best of internet only exclusive, because
Yeah.
that's what it was at the time.
Right.
Yeah, you're right. Helix, their website was helixrockband.on for Ontario.ca. And eventually it became planethelix.com. Yeah.
Oh my God. And the only
That's
way you know
hilarious.
that is to buy something of Helix and type that into your browser, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
But, you know,
early days.
to kind of get back to something that Tim had alluded to earlier, he'd said, you know, Helix were starting to have a resurgence a little bit around this. And I think Volmer has acknowledged that that was because they had an early web presence. You know, not every band had a website at that time. Helix
Especially
did, and it was
bands
personalized
of their
thing.
vintage.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's
Exactly.
pretty cutting edge, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
Volmer has always tried to stay cutting edge as far as communicating with his fans. You know,
Yeah.
I'll give him so much credit for being a pioneer on those internet days, because, like I said, he was personalizing this thing. He's like he does today. Oh, you know, I just got back from the record pressing plant. The whatever, you know, everything's looking great.
Yeah, but if you're
I just got back.
if you're a hardcore Helix fan, you want to hear what's going on.
Exactly.
And Brian,
He knows
as soon
how
as
to
he
deal
had
with
stuff
his
up for
fans.
sale,
Yeah.
and as soon as he had stuff up for sale, you'd buy it, and it would come signed. You know, most of the time it would come signed. You didn't order it signed; it just came signed.
That's nice.
Yeah.
And they were.
And you can message him directly. He's very approachable.
Yes, absolutely. And that's another thing, is that Tim was talking about this earlier, this exclusive version of SEX Rated. I emailed Brian. I said, have you ever thought about reissuing that early version of SEX Rated from the Good to the Last Drop cassette single? Not the CD single, only the cassette. Have you ever thought about reissuing that?
And
I'll never forget his response. It was one sentence. Mike, I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, there is a
it's hard to keep track.
available.
Hard to keep track.
And then I asked Daryl Gray on Facebook, and he suggested that I look at the Long Way to Heaven remaster. And I'm like, no, it's not on there, and it's not from that era either.
That's interesting. Why that album?
I don't. Maybe
Is
it's
that how
because
old that song
remastered.
is? Was it written in '85?
I don't think so. There's no indication that it would be. I mean, it sounds fresh.
Got me.
Now, maybe he was thinking that because he knows of these Rock Candy reissues that have come out, and I believe Long Way to Heaven was one of the Rock Candies.
Yeah. It is interesting when you can literally stump the band, but you can't, like, Good to the Last Drop, you can get a CD single of it, but I think it's just a promo and it's just the one track.
Well, that's this.
So
that's this one.
yeah. So
And I was
unfortunately,
disappointed.
yeah, unfortunately, some of these songs get orphaned, right?
Yeah.
When formats change. So yeah, there's a lot more Helix to come, but I think we've covered pretty good chunk. Like, we've taken care of the 90s and we're creeping into the 2000s, but there's a lot more, and there's a real rebirth that happens at the end of the first, whatever you want to call it, the aughts. Around 2009 is when things when they came back on my radar.
You know what? I just thought of something, Tim. There's a whole other thing that happened before 2009 that Grant may be completely unaware of, but
What
in
is
Canada
that?
was huge.
What's
and that's
that?
when Brian Volmer was associated with a little TV show from out your end of the way.
Yeah,
You know
but
what I'm talking about.
we'll talk about that when because that's
You're not
more
a fan.
mid.
I can tell from Tim's reaction he's not a fan.
No, look.
Hey,
Listen,
we have to
when
leave something for the next
came on the
episode.
air,
Yeah.
Listen, when that first came on the air, I'm like, Mike, they could have filmed that around here. I know these people.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that was my parents' reaction too. Okay, so anyway, we won't go too far, but that's.
But yeah, it did.
That's
It
when
it really started. It really started to, and that's when, and because of that, they all of a sudden they did better on the road, and the releases started coming faster. But yeah, I'm excited to get into that too. But I'm really glad we delved into this, because this is, like, in some ways, a lost period, especially right in the middle of the 90s.
The only thing that I really want to say that I didn't get to say earlier was this is tied. This is in my trio of top 3 Helix. I know.
Really?
I know.
Well, let me. I know
I
this
know.
is really a Brian Vollmer solo album to some degree, though. I'm just curious. I'm just kind of surprised because it doesn't really sound like Helix, though.
I didn't know if I was going to like it.
Okay.
And then That Day Is Gonna Come came out, and it's almost like a soft rock.
Oh yeah.
But it's good. It's
for whatever reason.
It's really good. It's just, it makes a lot more sense under the Brian Vollmer name. He's done a few, he's done a few solo albums under his own name, but then again, some of those songs
ended up on Helix
compilations and in Helix concerts.
And speaking of which, he's re-recording this called A Pleasure Doing Business, and he's going to make it sound like Helix because he's not happy with this album.
That's interesting.
You know, Martin criticized this record.
I do. Yes. I'm well aware of his criticism of it.
Traditional light hard rock, guitar, bass, and drums wrapped around a simple, general, and generic rock structure.
Yeah.
He might be right, but I think the reason that didn't matter to me was I didn't have anything like this in my collection. My collection was banging metal. So when this came out under the Helix banner, it opened a door to a softer realm of music that I had no knowledge or awareness of. Mm-hmm. So I was rather immune to Martin, the esteemed Martin's comments. Believe me, I knew every word of that, what you just said. I knew it off by heart.
Oh, man.
None of that meant anything to me because, sorry.
When I bought his first reviews book, I disagreed with so many, but they made me laugh. I got such a kick out of them, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I love his, you know, one of his, I think it's a review of a Rick Emmett solo album, and it starts off,
don't get me started.
Yeah, no,
that's a whole other show.
Idiots Rule Again.
He's like the Robert Christgau of metal.
Ipso facto, wasn't the review just, man, don't get me started?
Yeah, then he said, you know, ground rules indicate, you know, I'm into this about as much as Def Leppard's Adrenalize, but ground rules indicate I can't go lower than 0. If I could, though, Rick would be my man. Now, he's embarrassed about those early writings, but there's so many classic lines that I just, like, one of the things he said, and I don't even know who he was talking about, is like, dumb as a wet bag of hammers. Makes no sense, but I've used that in conversation. Oh, they're dumb as a wet bag of hammers. Or, you know, they're talking about Ace Frehley, can't sing, who cares? You know, can't sing, who cares vocals? Helix, he was, you know, I think he's got a soft spot for Helix, but this album would definitely not have been up his alley. Maybe he likes it now. That happens too. Sometimes those things change.
Your tastes change over time.
Maybe he'll like a new version of it because, you know, there's some good songs at the core.
I am curious to hear what you know, a little more wattage would do to that. There is, I should say, inside the liner notes here, there is a nice tribute to Paul Hackman. Yeah. So.
That's cool.
So, guys, that's I think we've done a pretty good job. Of
holy crap! You guys are, like I said, you can't get any more geekier than this. But if you're into Helix,
wear it proudly.
Wear it proudly, and there's a lot here to check out. That's what we're trying to say. You know, don't just stick to those Capitol records. There's a lot here in the later catalog, but we are going to get into even more of the later catalog on the next show. So stay tuned. Do you have anything else, gentlemen, to add?
Because I wrote it.
You wrote? Really?
I said, and read the Helix Wikipedia because I wrote it. Yeah.
Again, I said you can't get any more geeky.
It's a great guide. Trust me. It's a great guide.
I knew it was questionable to get Ladano on here, but it's worked out. I mean, he needs help, but it's okay. It's okay. All right, gentlemen, let's wrap this up. Michael Ladano, thank you for coming on. We will do it again. Tim Durling, we've seen Tim and both these gentlemen on this channel. We will be doing this again, and I will be sending you dates, and we will get this booked in. We're in August, September, so look for more Helix on this channel. So without any further ado, I'm going to bid you all farewell, and thanks for coming on. Please like, subscribe, check out these gentlemen's channels. Their links are down below, so please like, subscribe, check out what they have. And all right, we'll see you. Thanks, gentlemen.